Hey everyone, welcome back. We're going to be diving deep into something pretty big in the world of agriculture and conservation today.
Oh, yeah. Definitely a hot topic.
It's India's second national gene bank.
A big deal for India's future food security, for sure.
Huge, and a pretty important topic, I'd say, for those of you studying for the UPSC exams.
Definitely going to want to pay attention to this one. What's really interesting about this whole gene bank thing
Yeah.
is it's not just about, sticking seeds in a vault somewhere. It's a
Wow.
much bigger picture, safeguarding India's agricultural biodiversity.
Okay, so let's break this down a bit, because I think, some people might be thinking, wait a second,
Yeah.
doesn't India already have a national gene bank? We talked about this. It was established back in 1996.
Yeah, that's right. And that's a question that could come up on the UPSC exam for sure.
Yeah.
Why do we need another one? Well, the first gene bank, it's got a pretty big collection already. But this new one, it really shows how committed India is to really expanding those conservation efforts. Think of it this way. We're being proactive. We want to make sure that a wider range of genetic material is protected.
So what's the big difference? What can this new gene bank do that the first one can't?
Well, capacity is a big one. This new facility, they're aiming to store 1 million different types of seeds.
Wow.
That's 1 million germplasm lines. That's double what the existing gene bank can hold.
Wow.
It's also about stepping up research and development in agriculture,
Okay.
getting both the public and private sectors involved.
Now, the article we're looking at today, National Gene Bank, Securing India's Food and Nutritional Future from Down to Earth.
Great article.
It really highlights this connection between the National Gene Bank and those community seed banks.
Yeah.
Now, for those who maybe aren't familiar with that term, can you explain what community seed banks are all about?
Sure. So think of them as kind of like a grassroots conservation effort, happening on a local level. Community seed banks, or CSBs as they're often called, it's where people in a community come together.
Right.
They collect seeds, they store them, they share them. They're usually focusing on those varieties that are, traditionally important to their specific region.
So they're like little mini gene banks, but with a really strong emphasis on the community.
Exactly.
Why is it so important to connect these community efforts with what's happening at the national level with this big national gene bank?
Well, it's all about building a network,
Okay.
a really strong conservation network.
Uh-huh.
By connecting them, it means we're not just preserving seeds in some big national facility.
Right.
We're acknowledging and supporting the crucial role that local communities play.
Right.
They're the ones who've been maintaining this biodiversity.
This is making me think of a concept that comes up a lot in environmental science, the whole in situ and ex situ conservation thing.
Oh, yeah, good point.
It's all about making sure we're preserving that genetic diversity, both out in the wild, in natural habitats, and in more controlled environments like a gene bank.
Exactly. And when we connect the national efforts with what's happening in the communities, we're bridging that gap.
Yeah.
But we can't forget about the challenges that these community seed banks are facing.
Right.
Often they just don't have enough funding.
Yeah.
The infrastructure might not be there. They
Right.
might not even have the technical expertise they need.
Yeah.
And the article really highlights those as areas where they need more support.
And then there's that whole question of benefit sharing. How do we make sure that everyone benefits fairly, especially those communities who have been the guardians of these seeds for generations?
This is a huge issue,
Yeah.
especially if you're thinking about the UPSC mains exam. We're not just talking about conservation. We're talking about social justice. We're talking about equitable development. How do we make sure that the benefits from research, breeding, or if these resources are used commercially, that the benefits are shared fairly?
That's a big question. One we'll definitely need to explore further. But before we get into that, let's zoom out for a second. How does what India is doing fit into what's happening globally with seed conservation?
Well, India is already a major player on the global scene.
Right.
We have our own seed vault up in the Himalayas,
Right.
the Changla Seed Vault,
Yeah.
and we contribute to that global seed vault in Norway.
Right. The Svalbard Global Seed Vault.
The Doomsday Vault, that's what everyone calls it.
Exactly. Yeah.
So this new gene bank, it just shows how committed India is to global food security.
It's like we're building a safety net for the world's agricultural heritage.
Exactly. And the article points out some really successful models in other countries.
Oh, yeah.
Places like Nepal, Bhutan, Mexico, South Africa.
Okay.
They figured out how to really effectively link community seed banks with their national systems.
Cool. So we can learn from them.
Exactly. There's a lot we can learn from those examples to build a really strong and fair model for India.
So it's not just about building a gene bank. It's about creating a whole system that works for everyone.
That's the key.
But what's it going to take to make this vision a reality in India? What are those key ingredients for a model that actually works?
That's the big question, isn't it? And that's what we're going to unpack in the next part of our deep dive. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to our deep dive into India's second national gene bank.
Yeah, picking up where we left off.
We've talked about why it matters so much for India and why it's a key topic for you UPSC aspirants out there.
Absolutely.
But let's get into the details. How do we actually create a model that works? You know, one that really connects those national efforts with what's happening on the ground in communities.
Right, because that's the challenge, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, the article makes it clear strong collaboration is absolutely essential. We need everyone working together, the national institutions, the community seed banks, the local community. Yeah.
Think about it. Open communication, sharing knowledge, making decisions together.
You know, this makes me think about a theme that comes up all the time in the UPSC exams. Decentralization and participatory approaches. It's all about giving local communities the power to be involved in conservation.
Exactly. And of course, we can't forget about the private sector. They've got a really important role to play when it comes to agricultural research and development.
Right.
They've got the expertise, the resources. I mean, they could be a huge help.
Yeah.
But it's got to be done right. Their involvement needs to be all about conservation and that crucial piece, equitable benefit sharing.
So it's about striking a balance, right?
Yeah.
Making sure private sector engagement helps conservation and that the benefits go back to the communities.
You got it. And then there's technology.
Oh,
That's
wow.
another big piece of this whole puzzle. The article talks about adopting modern technologies for evaluating and developing seeds.
Which makes sense. It can help us really understand what these different varieties are capable of, potentially leading to crops that are more resilient and better adapted to climate change.
Okay, so UPSC prelims folks, listen up. Sounds like a potential question waiting to happen, the whole technology and sustainable agriculture thing.
Definitely keep that in mind. But we can't get so caught up in the new and shiny that we forget about traditional knowledge.
Right.
For centuries, farmers have been observing and experimenting.
Yeah.
They've gathered incredible knowledge. And for a truly sustainable system, we've got to combine that with modern science.
It's like we're blending the old and the new.
Yeah.
And speaking of blending, let's talk about something that might be a bit of a challenge, the whole relationship between the public and private sectors.
Yeah.
The article kind of hints that there might be some tension there.
Yeah, and historically there has been. Public institutions, like agricultural universities, their focus has always been on helping farmers.
Right.
Not on making profits. So as the private sector gets more involved, we have to make sure they're contributing to conservation and benefit sharing.
It's like walking a tightrope. How do we encourage the private sector to participate without letting them exploit these resources just for profit and not give back to the communities?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the article talks about getting private companies involved in research and development, using the resources from the gene bank. I mean, we're talking evaluating seed diversity, maybe even genome sequencing.
Wow.
Unlocking those hidden genetic secrets.
That sounds pretty amazing. But how do we stop those companies from just taking that information and running with it, leaving the communities behind?
That's where a strong governing body comes in.
Okay.
The article suggests that the National Gene Bank should have a governing body.
Right.
And get this, it should include representatives from community seed banks and the private sector.
So everyone has a voice, a real collaborative approach.
Exactly. Imagine this, a system where private companies have access to all this genetic diversity and the communities benefit from the knowledge and resources that the private sector can bring to the table. Everyone wins.
UPSC folks, this is gold.
Yeah.
This whole thing, the second national gene bank, the connection to community seed banks, all the complexities of benefit sharing.
Right. So much to unpack.
These are perfect examples of how environmental policy, agricultural development, and social justice all come together.
It's all connected.
And that kind of nuanced understanding, that's what the UPSC is all about.
Absolutely. It's not just about memorizing a bunch of facts.
Right.
It's about seeing how everything's connected, how these issues affect each other, being able to really analyze them critically.
Now, before we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with something to think about. This new gene bank, it's all about protecting India's incredible agricultural heritage.
A legacy worth saving.
But it can't just be the responsibility of scientists and policymakers. What can you do to support local communities to help protect biodiversity in your own region? That's a big question.
It really is.
And it's something we should all be thinking about, not just UPSC aspirants. All right, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into India's second national gene bank.
Lots to think about.
We've covered so much, from why this whole thing even started to how important those community seed banks are. And then, of course, all the complicated stuff around benefit sharing. But let's bring it all together now. What does this mean for you, not just as someone prepping for the UPSC, but as a citizen?
Yeah, it's easy to get lost in the big picture. But at the end of the day, food security, biodiversity, it affects all of us.
Oh, sure.
I mean, think about it. Every meal you eat is a result of the amazing diversity plants out there and all the work that farmers and scientists do.
Right.
This new gene bank, it's all about making sure that diversity is protected for the future.
Exactly. And as we've been saying, this isn't just some big national project. It's about supporting local farmers. Thinking about the choices we make when we buy food, advocating for policies that protect biodiversity. All these things can help create a food system that's more sustainable and more fair.
Totally. And it's not as complicated as it sounds. Choosing to buy your food from a local farmer's market, that's a direct way to support biodiversity. Picking those traditional varieties of crops instead of the ones that are mass-produced, it's like saying, hey, I value the cultural and ecological richness of our food.
Right. Now, all those little choices, when you multiply them by millions of people, they can really make a difference. So UPSC aspirants, as you're studying for your exams, don't just see this topic as something to memorize. Think about how it plays out in the real world. How can you help create a future where India's agricultural biodiversity isn't just surviving, but thriving?
And remember, this is just the beginning of the conversation. We really encourage you to check out the article National Gene Bank, Securing India's Food and Nutritional Future. It's from down to earth. It's packed with insights that can really help you understand this whole topic better.
Absolutely, and we want to hear from you. What stuck with you from this discussion? What other challenges and opportunities do you see when it comes to protecting biodiversity? Leave your thoughts in the comments below.
And hey, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives on important topics, especially for you UPSC folks.
Sharing this episode with your fellow aspirants, that's a great way to spark some good discussions and get those brains working. So until next time, keep those minds curious and remember, even small actions can help create a more sustainable and equitable future for everyone.